there, ladies and gentlemen, it's Rain here, and the entire spoiler is out for Dragons of Tarkir, and while I will be doing some uploads of articles for Brainstorm Brewery in the near future, which I haven't been great about, which I apologize for, um, I will be going over this draft format and the sealed format, discussing what makes it tick, how can we expect the format to play out in terms of how aggressive or slow it is, and just what sorts of keyword power levels there are, general concepts that you need to understand if you want to pre-evaluate a drafting format. Well, the first and the most easy thing to do when evaluating a new drafting format is to take a look at all of the common and uncommon, mostly unconditional removal. I say mostly unconditional because a card like Smite the Monsters, where it destroys a creature of power 4 or greater, it should be taken into account how good it is in the format based off of other cards in the format. However, that is still something I would look at when I'm looking at the removal going into a new set. Generally, cheap removal and common removal, and a combination of the two, is going to indicate a much slower set, as it is much easier to get rid of early aggressive threats and progress later on into the game, where people will draw more cards, draw more threats, and be able to fight through removal. So that is the first step we're going to take here today, is we're going to examine how efficient the removal is, how conditional the removal is, and see what the set's going to look like because of it. First piece of removal is Green's only removal. It's Epic Confrontation. It's basically a Savage Punch without the clause of Ferocious, but it does give automatic boost to the creature. I like this more than Savage Punch. I would find that I wouldn't play Savage Punch in certain green decks just because I couldn't trigger Ferocious very often. However, this is going to always make your guy bigger, and the toughness matters a lot more than the power. Savage Punch is going to be a much more aggressive card because it's much better to attack in after you do it. But in terms of fighting, this 2 staying the same is more important than this 1 being a decrease. So yeah, it's going to be very efficient removal. It's probably going to be better than Savage Punch. So 2 mana, good removal in green especially. Next up we have Silkwrap. This is a removal spell that comes down early. It's going to be very good at stopping early aggression. It's just the conditional clause on it relates to smaller creatures or creatures with low converted mana cost that come down relatively quickly. So you can already see some indication that there are some conditional clauses that make removal better against cheap creatures or aggressive decks, which will be running cheaper creatures. So this is an indicator that it's very efficient, it's very good at just being a 1-for-1 removal spell, but the condition is the format will slow down because this exists, since it will target low mana creatures. Next up is Enduring Victory. This is another common piece of this is a common piece of removal, like Epic Confrontation. You destroy attacking or blocking creature, you get a bolster or whatever. What they say about removal that costs a lot of mana is it's still removal. It isn't the most efficient sort of removal, so if we see a bunch of 5 mana, 6 mana removal, I would say that's an indicator that the format would be more likely to be aggressive. In a slower format, this is going to be very powerful, which I suspect, given the nature of future cards, that it will be. So this is going to be better than it normally would be. Not because of the bolster clause. It's just going to be removal. It's not efficient, but it's instant speed and it's good. Next up, one of the most exciting things is a reprint of Pacifism, at common rarity no less. This is straight up removal. Can't attack or block, might as well just be removal. Sure, there are more activated abilities in Wizards as pushing creatures to do more now, but Pacifism in limited is still just straight up 2 mana removal for the most part, for all intensive purposes. And at common, 2 mana removal is insane. You can first pick this easily in drafts. Now, maybe not in this draft, probably still. It's just that good. This is going to slow the format down immensely. As I was talking about with efficient and very powerful removal, this is unconditional removal at a very efficient mana cost. So this is one of the biggest drivers for a slower format already. Next up, we have Ultimate Price. It is uncommon, but it is still very efficient. 2 mana destroying monocolored creatures. Monocolor is a conditional clause in limited that will indicate typically to creatures that come down earlier, since you are much more likely over the course of the game draw your extra colors of mana to play your multicolor cards later on than you are to draw all of your colors early on, or draw multiple colors early on and play all your early creatures as multicolor creatures. So this is another piece of removal that has a subtle conditional clause that'll make games slower and be more efficient against faster decks, much like Silkwrap. Next up, we have Deathwind. This is a nice one. It gives creatures -X/-X till the end of turn. It's very reminiscent of Heat Ray. It's an instant as well, which is very good. You can use this as a combat trick for a very little amount of mana. Sure, it puts you at some risk because they could pump it in response, but generally this is just going to be very good. It's going to be a removal for an expensive cost, or a combat trick for a much less expensive cost. Very versatile, very powerful. Again, going to slow the format down because it is still rather efficient. Not very efficient against defensive creatures, creatures with more toughness than power, but very efficient against creatures with more power than toughness, which will generally be the case in most aggressive decks. So another subtle conditional clause that'll slow the format down. Again, just this pattern. I'll keep bringing it up, maybe no more times, but I'll mention it when it comes up. Now this one's just obvious. Defeat is a common efficient removal spell, sorcery, but that's fine. Destroys a creature power 2 or less. This is a very obvious conditional clause of killing small creatures, and with this many efficient ways to get rid of small creatures between Defeat, Deathwind, Ultimate Price, Silkwrap, and to an extent Epic Confrontation, you have to wonder just how many creatures that are small people are going to actually want to put in their decks. That said, Defeat destroys Megamorph creatures because they are power 2 or less. Silkwrap also gets rid of Megamorph creatures. Ultimate Price doesn't, but Deathwind does. So there's not really going to be a way to get around this. People can not play super aggressive cards in their deck to make these not as good. However, they're still going to be very, very good. And they're still going to slow the format down, as I've mentioned, because they're just so efficient and it's such a good rarity. Next is Flattened. It's 1 less than Throttle, and for 4 mana I can get behind this card. They're not really going to reprint Last Breath, which was very good, but this is as close as I think we're going to come for a while. Throttle was playable with an extra mana cost, and the difference between 4 and 5 is insane. This coming down a turn earlier is ridiculous. It's common again. Yeah, this is going to be one of the best commons in the set. That's hard to say, actually, because there's just so many good pieces of removal, like Defeat. So I'll evaluate that later. All I'm going to say is this is efficient as an instant. If it was a sorcery for 4 mana, I would consider it not efficient. I would consider it average. But it's also common and an instant, so it's just really good. Next up, we have our 3 mana Edicts, where you can gain some life if you have a dragon in your hand. It's also an instant speed edict, and at 3 mana for an instant speed edict, I consider that efficient. If you happen to have a dragon or have a dragon in your hand, well then life gain incidental upside that helps slow the game down. Yeah, this card is very, very, very good and very efficient. Roast, another piece of very efficient removal. 2 mana, 5 damage without flying. Even decks that are loaded with dragons will have megamorphs and stuff like that, so you're gonna find a target for this thing. Sorcery speed, sadly, but still, this is good removal. And it's at a very cheap cost again. Another cheap cost instant speed removal. It does 3 damage to a creature. You can do 3 damage to the player too, but that's not as important as killing a creature. Vaccine, it's 2 mana instant speed removal, which is very efficient. Slows the game down. Yes, admittedly, dealing 3 damage to their controller is not slowing the game down. However, this is more incidental, kind of along the lines of the Foul Tongue Invocation gaining 4. I'm not saying it's irrelevant, I'm saying it's not the key part of the card. Next up we have Seismic Rupture. Certain decks will want this, specifically decks that are running not a lot of Megamorph, and it's going to be very, very good. I'm not going to lie. Like, this thing is always going to be great. You just set up the situation correctly. It's very good if your opponent's playing an aggressive deck. It just stops them completely in their tracks. And if they're playing a slower deck, you're still going to be able to get a 1-for-1 or a 2-for-1 potentially, kind of along the lines of a Death's Grasp that did -2/-2 to all creatures, except it costs 2 less. It's still in a format where 2/2s for 3 are being very common, and should see very, very good value because of that. So yeah, another piece, it's widespread removal like Pyroclasm, Rolling Tumbler. So this will halt the aggressive decks in their tracks. Twin Bolts, good against X1s. X1s are typically more efficient if they have more power than 1. For instance, Blood-Soaked Champion, I can't think of many others, but still, this is a 2 mana shock, which isn't efficient, but it's better against aggressive decks again, because they'll be more likely to have 1 toughness creatures. It is a common as well. Still willing to pay 2 mana for a shock, and limited. It's not efficient, but it's still fine. Then we have Tail Slash. Tail Slash is Fall of the Hammer, except it costs 1 more. And for everybody who knows Fall of the Hammer, right here, great card in Born of the Gods, probably the best card. I'm glad they increased the mana cost by 1, but it's still going to be amazing, and it's still a common. So yeah, efficient removal. So that about sums up this video. I mentioned many times, all of these pieces of removal are efficient. Some of them have subtle clauses that cause them to be better against creatures early on, and some of them have obvious clauses that cause them to be better against creatures early on. Like this one as well. But in the end, the pieces of removal are just so efficient that you're going to need to draw a lot of cards to fight through it. And because of that, that is a strong indicator that this format is going to be slow. I will be going over other reasons why that is the case, or potentially not the case in future videos, but that is just discussion of removal, how to take a look at removal, how to examine a format before it comes out. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. Have a great day.